Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at a few new things. So we have the new Tom Ford Black Orchid collection. So this includes the new iconic Orchid blush, lipstick, and the two re-release shades in Runway Rose and Iconic Nude. I also have the new Tom Ford foundation. This is called the Architecture Radiance foundation. And we're going to take a look at the Viseart Midsommer Lumiere Étendue. And this was gifted. So let's go ahead and start with the Viseart. The Viseart Étendue palettes, this is my personal favorite size from Viseart. So this is the packaging we have now. I like to keep the sleeve. It does have the color names on there, and you can purchase shades individually at Viseart. So this is magnetic, and they have, basically gone a little bit more environmentally friendly with their packaging. So there's no longer a mirror. We have this little paper here, which you can leave to prevent the powder residue. And then as before, these things are magnetic. So let's go ahead and take a look at the swatches. And again, you can remove each of these pans individually. There's a little indent here, and these are magnetic, so they'll just pop right out there. And we're going to start off with swatching. We're going to go top left to right, all the way to the bottom. So this first shade here is a matte shade, and you can see it's a soft peachy pink. So there's a little bit of pink in here. So this is kind of the shade that I start off with this every time. It is a nice base shade for me. And then we have something a little bit more nude, a little bit more brown for a matte next to that. And then our next matte here is going to be a bit more of a medium depth rosy brown. And the last shade in the top, this shade for me doesn't work so well. Like you can see, I'm not getting a ton of product up with this one. And this is going to be a shimmery gold. So that one you can see is kind of like a little hard pan. And that's how it's been, before I even touched it with a finger. Unfortunately, that particular shade just doesn't work so well. This shade is another favorite of mine. So these top two here, or these two here, are two of my favorites. And you can see this is going to be a shimmery pale pink. I love pairing this on top of the other shades. The majority of this palette is fairly warm, so that is a nice shade to cool things off. Then we have a coppery gold shimmer. This is my other favorite shade in here, which is a nice matte plum. And I love mixing this with the pink shimmer and this first shell pink matte. This shade here is a really pretty shimmery pink, but this is going to be a duochrome. So you can see here, it kind of looks more like a bluish pink, but then when you put it on, you can see you've got more of that rusty orange with blue shimmer. So this will be a duochrome. I think that's a really pretty one. And then we have a matte, kind of like a soft clay. We have a matte brown. This is a pretty neutral brown here, medium depth. This one here is going to be a rose with a little bit of sparkle. It's a matte shade. It's like a dusty rose with a little bit of golden shimmer. And then our last shade here is going to be a deep matte brown. And this is going to be a bit more, it's slightly cool. So this is the Midsommer Lumiere palette. I've been wearing this a ton. But again, I've been focusing a lot on these three shades. And let me show you some demos. So right now, Viseart is actually having their summer sale, and this palette retails normally for $44 US, but it is $30.80, so it's 30% off on the Viseart website right now. According to Viseart, the Midsommer Lumiere Étendue beguiles as an ethereal extension of our beloved original palette, steeped in twilight bloom and fairy mischief. 12 shades spun from dusk and moonlit petals, soft fawns, rosewood, and glistening lilac with dew-kissed duochrome potions, a spell woven for midsummer revels and star-crossed dreamers. Now, if you are interested in more extensive shade descriptions, they do have a shade description for each shade in the palette on their website, as well as their recommendations on how to use the shades. And as I mentioned, you can purchase shades individually from Viseart as well as empty palettes. So the palette itself has a 3-year shelf life, so a 36-month shelf life. We have 18 grams of product. We have 12 shades, that's 1.5 grams per shade, and these are completely interchangeable with any of their other 1.5 gram shades. So things like the Petite Pro and so forth. The shadows are made in the United States. Now I have to say, I have purchased a ton of eyeshadow palettes over the years, a lot of expensive palettes. I've also purchased a ton of inexpensive palettes. Viseart still remain one of my favorites. They are a very consistent brand. We've got formulas that work well. You know, I love their mattes because they're easy to work with, they're easy to blend, they've got some beautiful shimmers, you know, they've got some duochromes. I would have to say for the most part their duochromes are not super shifty, they're more subtle duochromes. If you want something super shifty, you want something more like Danessa Myricks, for example. But out of all of the eyeshadow palettes in my collection, I consistently go back to my favorites from Viseart. So Viseart is one of my go-to brands. When I take a trip somewhere, I pretty much always pack a Viseart palette with me because you get a ton of shade options. It's lightweight, easy to travel with, and I think they're just one of the best brands for eyeshadows. I absolutely love them. Thank you so much to Viseart, by the way, for gifting this particular palette to me. I love my Viseart palettes. And just for reference, if you're wondering what my favorites are, some of my favorites would be the Cyranoise palette that came out last year, the Lila Lumiere, the Violette Vespertine, the Violette Étendue, and the Cashmere. Those are all some of my absolute favorites from Viseart. This is one that I have been wearing a ton, but I do want to say that it runs a little bit warm overall. So overall, it's more of a warm tone palette. Usually Viseart palettes are they're fairly mixed, with half being cooler, half being warmer, half being mattes, half being shimmers. And I would say with this particular one, they're really leaning into more of those rosy nudes that lean a little bit warm and more of the matte look. We do have some shimmers here, but this is going to give you more of that sophisticated rosy nude kind of look that, you know, is a pretty classic aesthetic. So I'm very happy with this palette. I think it is a gorgeous palette. I love the formulas. Again, the one in the top right corner of the palette, that one there is shade Dewdrop. That's the only one that I really have any issues with. That one, for some reason, the formula is just, it's too firm. It doesn't really come up. There's not much pickup from that product. So it works well for, you know, more of a scattered starlight effect as a topper, but I can't really get a ton of product for that. So that particular shade doesn't work so well for me, but the rest of the palette has worked out really well. I think it's a gorgeous palette. And again, you've got some really great staple shades in here, and I like having a mix. You know, although the palette does run warm overall, we've got some cooler tone shades in there, so you can really mix and match and make things your own. All right, so let's take a look at the swatches one more time. And yeah, so overall, I think it's a beautiful palette, and I hope this has been helpful. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Tom Ford foundation. Okay, so this is the new Tom Ford Architecture Radiance foundation, and this is essentially a replacement for the Shade and Illuminate foundation. I have shade 0.5C Pearl, and this is a good shade for me. It's a little light right now for this time of year, but for the majority of the year, this will probably be a perfect match for me. I could have possibly also gone with 1C Cameo. So if you're a little bit deeper than me, you might want to veer towards that one. And I think it's a really nice shade overall. It's a little cool, but it's not super pink. So it's neutral leaning cool. So this is the foundation, and you can see that it's got a really nice radiance to it without looking super wet. Just a quick look at the packaging, then we'll move on to demos and details. So we have our traditional, Tom Ford coloration for the top. This is a glass bottle, and this is basically it. So pretty traditional. We do have a pump dispenser on this. So let's look at the demos in detail. And I have a wear test in here as well, so you can see how this has performed. I've actually been using this for, I've worn it for 3 days so far. So it's still kind of early in the reviews. I'll have more extensive thoughts on this when we get to the end of the month and I have my repurchase review. Now, although this is essentially a replacement for the Shade and Illuminate foundation, I personally don't have that foundation, so I cannot compare the ingredients or the finish on those. I never picked that one up. You know, it was actually more expensive than this one. So the Architecture Radiance retails for $95 US. And we have the standard 1 fluid ounce or 30 milliliters of product. It does have broad spectrum SPF 50+. And the active ingredients for the sunscreen are ensulazole, octinoxate, octisalate, and zinc oxide. And the Tom Ford foundation is made in Canada. Personally, I don't like to depend on SPF in a foundation. I feel like I'm never putting on enough product for that. So it's a nice added benefit, but it's not something that I would use for sun protection. According to Tom Ford, this is liquid light in a weightless serum-like formula, an exclusive blend of skincare actives, Queen of the Night, a soothing night blooming flower, niacinamide, hyaluronic acids, and botanical oils helps to protect and strengthen the skin barrier. Dimensional light diffusing powders create a soft lit from within look. SPF 50+ protects from the sun and maintains all day sweat and humidity resistance. Skin is transformed and looks more radiant over time. A medium to full coverage 24-hour wear skincare infused foundation that creates seamless radiance at every angle, lighting the face to cinematic perfection. They make a lot of claims here, such as leave skin looking radiant and hydrated with a luminous finish, leave skin feeling comfortable, smoother, and hydrated, applies smoothly and instantly, blends into skin, maintains a dewy, plump look all day, and so forth. They also say that you've got 24-hour wear, fade-resistant, color true, 24-hour non-creasing or settling, non-caking or poring, and 24 hours of evening the skin tone. We have an immediate and 24-hour radiance and immediate and 12-hour moisture. It's sweat and humidity resistant, reduces fine lines and wrinkles, it's water resistant, there's oil control, immediately minimizes the appearance of pores, and improves skin tone in 1 week. Wow, they have a ton of claims for this. And I have to say, I think it is a very nice foundation. It gives me a nice radiance. I have worn this in the humidity. It hasn't been super hot or super humid here, so it's been more moderate, but it does hold up. It does look a little bit more dewy with that, but the actual foundation itself doesn't really move around. And you can see in the wear test here, this was a day, you know, I spent the majority of the day outside in the sun and the heat and so forth. And you can see the foundation really holds up well. It looks slightly more dewy while you're wearing it, but it maintains its radiance. There's a little bit of a dewy texture on the skin, but it really kind of stays put. Even though it stays put, because it does look a little bit more dewier and I can kind of feel it on my skin if I go to touch it, I don't personally consider this sweat or humidity resistant. I think it manages them very well, but you have to manage your expectations with a product like this. It's not going to be a miracle no matter how many claims they make. I can attest that this is water resistant, so you do want to remove this with an appropriate cleanser. I like to use an oil-based cleanser at the end of the day, but it stays put really well. So I do have to commend it for that. I think it's a very nice foundation. As for oil control, I didn't have any issues with separation. You can see what it looks like at the end of a long, hot day, and I think that's pretty good. But I do think that those with super oily skin, this is not going to be something that, you know, I'm not saying that it wouldn't work for oily skin tones, but I do think that a primer that controls oil, something like the Danessa Myricks blurring balm, the Yummy Skin blurring balm, I think something like that underneath would definitely still go a long way to making sure that, you know, there's no issues throughout the day. So I would say if you have a very oily skin, you still want to add something to help with that oil control. I think this kind of gives you just moderate control over the situation. As for the skincare benefits, as I've mentioned, I've worn this for 3 days now, and this is my 4th time on my skin. I haven't noticed anything at this point, but I'd be hard pressed to say that, you know, you really ever notice anything significant from makeup. I wouldn't really count on that. I think one of the biggest things that wearing foundation can do for skincare is help create a barrier from like pollution and things that you might get from the air that could cause skin issues. And so I think in that way it's going to help, but I really don't think that the amount of product you're using on the face here, especially since you're putting your skincare on before, I personally wouldn't make any skincare claims with the foundation. Overall, I think this is a really beautiful foundation. My favorite foundations are typically the Cle de Peau foundations. I always have like a great match from them. They're really easy to use. And I think that this is going up there with one, with my rotation of Cle de Peau foundations. I think it's a really nice product, and it reminds me of the Cle de Peau Natural Radiance Foundation. So let's take a look at some swatches. All right, so this is the Cle de Peau Radiant Fluid Natural Foundation, and I wear shade I-10. My usual foundation is a mix of this and the matte version. I usually do a 50-50 mix. Between the two of these, you can see that the Cle de Peau is going to be a little bit more beige, and it blends in with my skin tone a little bit better. So I do have a slightly better color choice with that. Again, the Cameo could have been another option for me, but I kind of blind bought it with the shades. But you can see that the Tom Ford is a little bit more, it's a little more yellow. Now, as for coverage, I think that the two of them are pretty comparable in terms of coverage. So these are both medium. You can build them up to like a stronger medium, but you don't really get to a full coverage with either of these. They have a sheerness, so it's more light to medium coverage. And I would say that the level of radiance between the two of these is pretty similar. When I add additional layers of the Cle de Peau, I feel like it has a little bit more radiance than the Tom Ford. And the Tom Ford looks a little bit more natural with more layers. So, you know, I think it kind of depends. If you're doing like a light sheer layer with both of these, they're going to look pretty similar on the skin. But if you're building it up to more of a fuller medium coverage, then I think the Tom Ford it's radiant, but it's a little bit less radiant looking on the skin. But I do want to note that I still have a little bit more of that dewier texture from the Tom Ford than I do with the Cle de Peau. Now, let me just put a fresh swatch of the Tom Ford one right here so you can see the amount of oxidation. You can see it's pretty minimal. And we're just going to do a couple of comparisons. So this is the Koh Gen Do Moisture Foundation in 012. This is one of my go-to shades, or one of my go-to foundations as well. This is going to give you more of a lighter medium coverage. This is not as radiant. This is more of a natural finish. You can see this is going to be a little bit more beige as well. There's a little more peach in it, whereas the Tom Ford has a little bit more yellow, but they're pretty similar in terms of tone. This is the Dior Forever Hydra Nude, and this is the shade 0N. And I'm going to put this one's right here. You can see it's a little bit more ivory and a little bit less peachy. This one here is the Tom Ford, Dior Tom Ford. So this one here, Tom Ford, Koh Gen Do 012. This is our Cle de Peau in I-10, and this is the Dior in 0N. And this is the Chanel, number 1 de Chanel in BD01. So let's see here. Where can we put this one? I'm going to squeeze this in right here. So this is Tom Ford. This is Koh Gen Do. And right in the middle here, a little bit more beige, is going to be our Chanel BD01. And you can see that this is... it's a little less pink than the Cle de Peau. It's more of a yellow beige in comparison, but it's probably closer to that. And the Dior 0N. So one more time, we have Dior 0N, Cle de Peau I-10, Tom Ford in 0.5C Pearl. This is Chanel in BD01, and this is Koh Gen Do 012. So I hope that was helpful. Let's go ahead and move on to the Iconic Orchid collection. All right, so the Tom Ford Iconic Orchid collection. I've been waiting for this. I've been very, very eager for this. I have loved the cream blush that came out a couple years ago, Cafe Blush. This is the Cafe Blush here versus the new Iconic Orchid packaging. You can see it's the same packaging but different colors. I do think though that the Cafe Blush one being a little bit more of a satin matte finish versus the shiny black, I feel like this one looks a little bit more luxe versus the shiny black and gold here. So personal preference there. I would have preferred something a little bit more matte. This is very lightweight plastic, by the way. We have a mirror here and there is a little sticker on the mirror, and this is the shade 01 Iconic Orchid. Go ahead and put this here, and look at this. You can see when you buff this in, you do get a radiance. This is kind of like a fuchsia berry. I think it's a really pretty shade. And let's take a look at this on the cheeks. This is a limited edition creme blush. It retails for $100 US. We have 6 grams of product, and this is made in Italy. It's described as a raspberry pink with blended. I'd say that's pretty accurate there. It's that nice bright raspberry pink. I think it's a gorgeous, gorgeous shade. I personally really love this color. It is pigmented. It is bright. So you want to go in with a very light, soft hand and then build from there, because this is one of those ones that is so pigmented that if you put on too much, it's much harder to clean that up nicely. According to Tom Ford, they recommend using this with their brush number 2. I like to use the Sonia G mini base brush or the mini sheer buffer, which is my favorite blush brush. It was dirty today, so I didn't get to use that in the video today, but I think that is a great choice, especially when you have something pigmented like this, because it's much easier with those stippling style bristles to get a lighter application. Now, according to Tom Ford, the sumptuous formula glides onto cheeks with the velvety comfort of a cream and blends out for a diffused powder soft look. Lightweight and buildable, this emollient formula imparts a flush of dramatic, highly desirable raspberry pink color and subtle glow. A lightweight cream formula that melds seamlessly into skin, providing customizable, soft focus color. I'd have to agree with all of that. I think this is a great blush. It's a great formula. It is going to be the same formula as that in the Cafe blush, which is one of my favorites because it blends out and you have, it doesn't feel powdery on the skin, but it sets. You don't feel any residue or stickiness or anything like that on the cheek. You have more of that radiant soft matte, like that satin matte kind of finish. There is a little luminosity, but there's no like shimmer or glitter or anything like that. And if you're pairing this with a more matte foundation, you just get a really subtle luminosity with this. It blends beautifully with the skin. It stays put all day, and you could see in the foundation wear test, how that held up throughout the day. I think it's a really beautiful color. Now, if this is a shade that is harder for you to go in with, a lighter application, I definitely recommend underpainting with this. This is a beautiful shade to use underneath foundation, pile it up a little bit more and then put the foundation on top, and you get this really nice subtle glow. So I am a fan of this. It is an expensive cream blush. There is no suggested shelf life on the packaging. I have to say my Cafe blush shade is still going strong. There are no issues. You only need a tiny bit of this at once though. So, unless you're gonna use this shade all the time, it is a very expensive blush. But this is a limited edition shade, so if you're interested, you don't want to take too long to decide. So let's see if we can help you out with a few comparisons. Let's start off with a couple of Westman Atelier shades. This one here is the shade Pop It, which is going to be it's a little bit more of a fuchsia pink. There's a little bit more of a plummy note in the Tom Ford, but they are similar. And then we have Doo Doo from Westman Atelier, which is going to be a little bit more of a more of a dusty berry in comparison. Now this shade from Neen, this is called Koi. This is a really beautiful shade as well. And I'm going to put this one right up here. You can see that this is a close shade comparison. However, the formula for this is going to be one that is a little bit more sticky, dewy in texture. It's slightly warmer than the Tom Ford, but you can see that they do have some similarities there in the shade. And then I want to take a look at the Anna Sui. This is the black cream blush. And this one here, let's put this here. You can see this will actually kind of blend out to a pink. You can see it's going to be a lighter, softer shade. And it's a little bit more purple, but if you have a more fair skin tone and you're looking for something a little bit easier that still gives a similar shade, I think that's a great option. And then we have the shade It Girl from Danessa Myricks in the Yummy Skin Blushes. This is going to be more hot pink, more neon. So this is Neen and Koi. This is Tom Ford Iconic Orchid, Westman Atelier Pop It, Westman Atelier Doo Doo. This is Anna Sui Black Cream Blush and Danessa Myricks It Girl. Let's take a look at the Cafe shade as well. So you can see I've actually used this one a ton. I wore this basically straight for like 6 months, and you can see how little of a dent this actually makes. So I just wanted to show you how well the product still lasts after, I think this has been 2 years now. And you can see that this one here is going to be more of a rosy nude. Really pretty shade, very different from Iconic Orchid, but they're both fantastic products. And this is one of my go-to cream blushes, even still. All right, so I hope this has been helpful. One more time, we have Cafe Blush from Tom Ford. Tom Ford Iconic Orchid, Neen and Koi, Westman Atelier Pop It and Doo Doo, Anna Sui Black Cream Blush, and Danessa Myricks It Girl. So I hope that's helpful. Let's take a look at the lipstick shades. All right, so these are the Tom Ford lipsticks. So this is our new packaging that matches the Iconic Orchid blush packaging here. So it is limited edition packaging. Iconic Orchid is a limited edition shade. And Iconic Nude 151. This shade has been out before. I did not have it, so I just purchased it with this collection. And you can see that this is going to be a warm, it's a brown with a touch of rose, but it definitely leans warm. You've got kind of that terracotta rose hue to it. Then we have Runway Rose, shade number 19. This is in the regular permanent line. I already had this one. And this is kind of a warm tone medium rose. And then here is Iconic Orchid, which is what's on my lips now. And you can see this is going to be more of a berry pink. And let me put the blush with that. So here is the Iconic Orchid blush. And I have to say, I did think that the lipstick was going to be a little bit more vibrant. I thought it would have a little more purple. I was expecting something more similar to the Hermes Prune Noir shade. But I think this is a really pretty shade here. This is kind of like a nice, more neutral rose that leans a little cool. And let's take a look at these on the lips. The lipsticks retail for $65 US. We have 3 grams of product in each. These are made in Belgium. According to Tom Ford, Iconic Nude is a warm rose nude, whereas the Runway Rose is a rose pink, and Black Orchid is described as a pink mauve. I would say those are fairly accurate descriptions, but I do think that Runway Rose is a warm rose pink, so I would definitely put that warm in there. Tom Ford lipsticks, they go on beautifully. We have a nice satin finish with these. They're comfortable. There is a bit of a vanilla fragrance. It's kind of like a vanilla perfumey fragrance, so not just straight up vanilla. You know, we've seen in the past issues with them not lasting long, but I have to say when they redid the formula a couple years back, those are still going strong. I haven't had any of the ones that I've purchased in the last couple of years turn. So I think they might be better now. I think it might be safe to say that. I personally really like all three of these shades, but the Iconic Nude is definitely a little bit warmer than I was expecting. I think it looks like a beautiful nude shade though, with a touch of warmth. It reminds me of more of a, you know, as you're transitioning into the autumn. I think that's a great shade for that. The Runway Rose is a beautiful, it's a classic, but the Iconic Orchid is definitely my favorite of the three. So it's definitely going to be the coolest of the three shades. And I think a Mauve Rose is a good way. And I think a Mauve Rose is a good way to describe it. I think it's a really beautiful shade. I was expecting it to look a little bit more like the blush. It really doesn't, but it goes nicely with it. And I think the fact that it doesn't makes it a little bit more wearable. This is a really nice wearable shade. But let's take a look at just a couple of quick comparisons here. And I want to start off with the Hermes in Prune Noir. This is discontinued. It was a limited edition shade. This is what I was thinking the Orchid shade would look like. So I thought it'd be a little bit more of a purple shade. And you can see it's definitely pink. It's still cool, but it's not as cool as I was expecting. I also wanted to compare a few of the lipsticks that I have recently reviewed. This is the Chantecaille in Anemone, and you can see that that's actually going to be closest to the Runway Rose. Runway Rose is actually slightly warmer, but they're very close. And then the Cle de Peau lipsticks that I recently purchased, we're going to go ahead, let's put our satins here. This is 28, which is more of a soft red. And then we have 26, which is my personal favorite of their new shades. And let's put this one right here. You can see that this is going to be a little bit more, it's a little dustier. It's also a little cooler. There's a little more purple in it than the Iconic Orchid. So although they are pretty different shades, they are relatively close. Then for their mattes, let's go in order here. We have 121, which is the chocolate peony shade. Doesn't really match with any of these. We have 122, which again, doesn't really match with any of these. And 124 here, which it's closest to Iconic Orchid, but this is definitely more of a rose. Is a little bit more neutral. And I want to take a look at Sarah Creel in Double Standard. Let's go ahead, we'll put this one here. This is another really great rose, but it is kind of a mix of Iconic Orchid and Runway Rose. So it's definitely not as cool or as warm as either of those. The color's kind of right in the middle. All right, so I hope those were helpful. Again, Tom Ford, we have Iconic Nude, Runway Rose, Iconic Orchid. This is going to be our Sarah Creel in Double Standard. And this one here is Chantecaille in Anemone in the new lip creme formula. Then we have Hermes Prune Noir. This is Cle de Peau Satins in 28 and 26, Cle de Peau Mattes in 121, 122, and 124. And this shade here is the Iconic Orchid Blush from Tom Ford. So you can see they're pretty different from each other. So I hope that has been helpful. Let's do a quick summary of everything we looked at. We started off with the Viseart Midsommer Lumiere palette. I think this is a beautiful palette. You know, it gives you kind of that classic warm rose kind of look. They're mostly like beiges and a few like rosy shades. We've got even like a plum in there. I think it's a really nice neutral tone palette with just a little bit more of that rosy vibe to it. And again, it's mostly mattes, fewer shimmers. I think it's a really great palette though. Then we moved on to the Tom Ford Architecture Radiance Foundation. I think this is a really nice radiant foundation. You know, it does leave a little bit of a dewy texture on your skin. It's light to medium coverage. They've got a pretty extensive shade range on here, and I think it's a really nice formula. Although it does still have a little bit of dewy texture, it seems to stay put really well throughout the day. So I think it's a nice foundation. And then we took a look at the new Iconic Orchid Blush, which is this shade here. I love it. If I had to pick one thing out of this, all the new Tom Ford items here, it would be this blush personally, but it is a very expensive blush for what you're getting, you know, considering it's one shade. So, you know, it's definitely going to be something that you need to make sure if you're going to purchase this, this is going to be something you want to make sure does not sit in your drawer. Otherwise, it might be better to take a look at some other options. As for the lipsticks, I love Tom Ford lipsticks. I think these are great, but out of the three, I definitely prefer the Iconic Orchid. And I think overall though, they've got a nice collection. I personally don't really see how the Iconic Nude shade really goes with this blush. I understand that they wanted some sort of lighter shade, but I think for this collection, they should have gone with something a little bit lighter and cooler versus this warm nude shade, which is a great shade, but in my opinion, just doesn't quite match the other items in this collection. So I hope this has been helpful. Overall, I'm very happy with everything that I purchased here today. And thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know if you've tried any of these, and please share your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Have a great day.